women should feel empowered to hold each other up.
We want to build a community to share other women's stories.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Tea with TE. I am Sarah Herman, and this week I'm really excited to be joined by Tenaya Britton. She is a marketing executive and mother, and we are excited to dive into some important topics today. Tenaya, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's fun to be here. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah. So this week we're going to talk about some really topics I'm excited to talk about, being a woman in a professional workforce and really just navigating our journeys in this corporate world. And, Tenaya has such an inspiring story. We really connected quickly over some similar experiences. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and building a community and just how to really build a life for yourself that is fulfilling and feels more meaningful and, really works for what your specific needs are. So why don't you first just high level give us an introduction on sort of yourself and your background?
Sure. I was in corporate world for about 16 plus years, primarily in advertising, and then went in-house for a marketing studio and a big fintech company. And I learned a lot along the way in terms of launching creative campaigns, helping develop programming, taking on leadership roles, managing people, etc. And along the way, I think I always tried to make it work. Like I always tried to fit in, whether it was like dressing a certain way to look more creative in advertising, or whether it was wearing mock turtlenecks so I fit in among the engineers.
Yeah.
I was always trying to mold myself to fit in, whether it was, sitting up straight with a bigger posture, the way I conducted myself in meetings. I was always trying to fit in. And, fast forward to about a couple years ago, COVID, for many of us, hit me and my family very hard. I was going through 2.5 years of IVF. My husband was treating COVID patients. He's a physician.
Wow.
And when I had my child, I went through a very significant mental health crisis. And, as hard as that was, it was also, looking back, a beautiful moment to kind of look at my life and how I was leading it. And one of the things that I did during the healing process was write down my values. What do I value? And one value that really stuck out was building community.
Yeah.
And so I used that as kind of like a guiding North Star to look at my life, look at my career, look at my family life, and look at how I was prioritizing my time. So that, in a nutshell, is the last 15 years, and here I am today, leading a life that is more aligned with my values.
Yeah. There's so much in there I want to tackle because, and this is sort of when we first started speaking, like just so many similar thoughts. I think COVID, for awful as it was and still continues to be, it really did, I think, for a lot of people, like force them to their rock bottom place and then make you really realize like, okay, what am I prioritizing? Because suddenly when you're stuck at home with your family and the world is crumbling around you, the things that you thought were really important were not important. So, I think that resonates with so many people, and especially, I think for women, like the 9-to-5 corporate structure was not created with us in mind. Obviously back then we were in the kitchen and at home with the kids, and then during COVID we were that and also working at the same time. So
Right.
it is this, there's constantly these discussions around how do you have work-life balance and how do you prioritize one over the other, and we go around the hamster wheel about it. But you made some big, life changes. You lived in, a metropolis, lived in the city, you had a big corporate role, and then you up and moved your life to Maine and really found a new way of living. Tell me what you touched on the mental health crisis and just everything that was going on, but what really gave you the courage to start that journey, to really make that decision? Because that's scary. I don't like change. So the thought of moving to a different state, even if it's like New Jersey from Pennsylvania, would stress me out. So tell me a bit about that.
So much to unpack here. The 9 to 5, work-life balance. I think I've started to stop saying work-life balance and ask the question, how do you want to live? How do you want to live?
Right.
How do you want to spend your time?
Yeah.
Spend your time with your family, and then working backwards from there in terms of how you structure your life.
Yeah.
I I think for me, in terms of the big life changes, I had a partner that went through the trauma of me living this mental health crisis, of me being
Mhm.
hospitalized. And, when you experience what, I almost honestly died. So how do you, when you experience something like that, as severe as
Yeah.
that, and I don't think you have to experience something as severe as that. If you're just not happy with your life, then
Right.
how do you make changes? And I think for me, it was incredibly motivating to make some pretty significant life changes, which was, yes, moving cities, finding a place that wasn't necessarily as hard, as frenetic as New York City, and wasn't as costly, and finding a place where, people were living a life that they were making more time to connect with their community.
Right.
And so those values with this community aligned with what my husband and I were looking for. And, from a career standpoint, where I was working before didn't necessarily align with who I was. And I think I've always been someone who is very highly motivated and entrepreneurial. And I think I was lucky, right? I had years of experience working in the
Yeah.
corporate world that I could lean on and then go off on my own.
Right.
So very grateful for that. And I don't regret anything. I mean, there's something
Yeah.
really magical about living in New York City, but it just didn't serve me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve me right now. And so I think when you experience something like I experienced, and even if you don't experience something that like that I experienced, it's about, how do you want to spend your time in life? How do you want to live
Yeah.
your life? And it's really on you to make that decision.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I think it's so, one thing that I experienced, my previous firm was there for a long time. I joined early on, and I think, again, as women, we're very proud of our accomplishments, right? We have careers that our mothers didn't have, and many of us. And so I started to get really lost in my job, and that my job and my employer, that was my part of my identity. And then, trying to find, but I'm also a mother, and how do I also have my mom hat? But between those two roles, like I was this person before all these things came
yeah,
to be. And so I think, like, in the beginning, you're so focused on your career and building. And then, if you do start a family, there's these two competing, areas of focus that you get so lost in the middle of that. So, you know, when you realized I'm more than this, this is not how I want to live my life. And I want my life to be more than just, I'm more than just a mother. I'm more than just what my career or my role is. Was there I guess, within the workplace, like an inflection point for you that you realized, because again, it's about courage. It is up to you. But I do think oftentimes the things we want to do are, for me, like the scariest. I'm always the most concerned about, well, what is everyone else going to think about this? Even though I know in my gut, this is what I want to do, but I'm so afraid of everyone else's perception for some odd reason. How did you navigate that?
it's hard. I think what you're talking about is this concept of, if you're enough, am I
Yeah.
enough?
Yeah.
Without the label of these big company names, without the label of, if you're single, having the idea that you don't have a partner, or you don't have
Hmm.
these things to lean on. You by yourself, are you enough?
Yeah.
And I had to sit with that for a long time. And, when people were asking me what I was doing with my career, and I said, at the moment I'm figuring it out and taking time to heal. I wasn't quite ready at that point to share the story of my mental health crisis,
Right.
and had to do. I did a lot of therapy, and I kind of sat with myself, because a lot of work is, especially, it's hard. I mean, for those of us who are moms, it can be very lonely. A lot of people have talked about that, right? You're not
Mhm.
having someone tell you, oh my God, you're doing such an amazing job.
Right.
We're going to promote you to super mom. Like,
Yeah.
you're having this ego driven feedback of accomplishments, of titles, salary raises. You're actually not getting paid for this stuff. So
Yeah.
I was in this interesting time period of being a new mom, taking time off of work, leaving this job that, in New York City, it had an incredible reputation, the company.
Hmm.
And you're kind of hiding behind that
Yeah.
brand name. Right? It's not just you by yourself and you sitting alone and sharing with people. Well, I'm a consultant. Oh, well, what company do you work for?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
I work for myself. So
Yes.
there's not this immediate, like, people knowing because you work for a certain company, because you have a certain title, that you are smart, that you are capable, that you have high aptitude, all these things that people can quickly categorize you and quickly glean from just titles and names. And so in terms of like an inflection point, I didn't have a choice, right? Like, I hit rock bottom,
Yeah.
and I had to go through the healing process and figure it out. And I think for me, putting pen to paper and really sitting in, feeling in, and looking at what my values are was incredibly helpful in terms of helping guide me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know that for you, what's been such an important part of that healing process too, you referenced a bit, is the community. You've moved
Yeah.
somewhere where there's this community feeling. And I think, again, there's a lot of times discussions around building your network and being out there and networking, which is very important, but having a community that's not necessarily serving just your professional career, but just a community of women and peers for you to help and for you to get advice from. How did you start to build that community? Like, was it organic? Did you go out and seek out certain types of people? What were the steps that you took? Because I think some people feel like, what does that mean? Like, how do I do that?
Right, exactly. And I also think people are scared and they're icked out by the concept of networking. There's some
Yes.
people who say, I can't network, I can't do that. If you strip away like just stop using that word network.
Yeah.
Just talk about meeting people, connecting
Yeah.
with people at a very human level. For me, it was moving here and sharing out to my friends, the fact that I had moved to Portland. Who do you know?
Hmm.
This is what I'm looking to do. I'm interested in supporting the small business community. So I put that out there, like, put out to the universe and tell people what you're looking to do and how you want
Yeah.
to spend your time, and ask for help. Who do you know? Can you connect me to people?
Yeah.
And people want to help each other. And so one, friend connected me to so and so, and then that led to another connection. And soon enough, I was finding myself connected to a community of people that were aligned to my values. And I was becoming involved with organizations. One organization, I've now been teaching a couple classes to start the startup community. That's really important to me.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'm on a nonprofit board that helps support all the local small businesses in town. And that's all because I put it out there of
Yeah.
what I'm looking to do. So I think it's understanding, what are you looking for, or you can just start by simply connecting with people, see who you resonate with, and go from there. And and stop using the term network.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because I do think oftentimes there's this fear of, you know, asking for something, right? Like you feel, maybe nervous to feel like you're a bother, or are they going to want do they want to network with me, or do they want to communicate with me? And I think a lot of times it does just have to start with yourself. Like you said, ask the question, hey, let's grab coffee, or let's, I see that you are connected to this person. Like I'd love an introduction. And 9 times out of 10, people are always willing to do that. And again, I think especially now in a sort of post-COVID world, people are dying for human interaction and to be, off of the Zooms and in person and out together and sharing experiences. What are the, in terms of the community that you have, and maybe the women, or maybe there's some men too that you interact with, what does that look like from an encouraged perspective, and what types of gatherings do you have together? Are you getting together with them every so often, and what is that like? What does that look like?
Well, let me first answer the first question of like people being a little nervous about putting themselves out there, right? And connecting with people. I think if you go into the mindset that, they're going to help you, yes, but you can help them, and ask
Yeah.
the question, how can I help you? So
Hmm.
it feels reciprocal. I think because people want to give, and they don't want to just receive. So
Yeah.
know you can help someone that you're connecting with. So I share that because maybe that's just an easier approach going into meeting someone for the first time. As for my community, it's become a community of men and women who are, some of them are startup founders, a lot of them are consultants, have become consultants who've gone off on their own, like myself.
Yep.
And whenever I meet a founder of a business who's looking for support when it comes to PR or marketing, and I can't serve them, then I send them to my network
Yeah.
of amazing professionals that are here in Portland, Maine, and who live all over the US, who I've connected with. So that's been amazing. And then, it's become a community of women who support one another. A lot of us have moved from big cities that don't have family here in town.
Yeah.
And so we need extra support in terms of childcare, professional support,
Yeah.
emotional support. And so some of us are coming together, and we're creating more of a formalized network community of women that we're going to be hosting a big event in November, which I'm really excited about. And the format will be kind of an ask and offer. So you
Yeah.
ask what your need is, and then you offer something that you could
Love
provide.
that.
And just to be fun and casual, and almost feel we're trying to build this like, and one of the things that we've talked about is forming a Slack channel, so you can
Yeah.
fire away, ask a question, whether it's personal, professional, and get an immediate response. And then my community has also become, because of this board, I've met a lot of business owners, small business owners around Portland, and that's been absolutely incredible, walking into a store and knowing who owns it
Yeah.
and having a personal connection with them. So it's been absolutely beautiful.
That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I love that it started sort of more casual, and now it's becoming this more formalized event. That was something a previous boss of mine, and I've said to people on my team, if there's not a group that you feel connected to, or that you feel like makes sense for you, start it, start from scratch.
Right, right.
Get a group of people together and have a conversation and set a cadence. And I think that you don't realize how much those conversations and meetings can have an impact on you until you actually experience it and go through it, because sometimes you also just need like a soundboard, right? To
Yeah.
talk to, that's objective, that isn't in the day-to-day of your personal life or professional life. And for me, I was always so nervous to put myself out there. And even though I'm a recruiter and I'm in sales and I talk to people all day as my job, it was for a very specific reason. Like this is why we're talking, and this is,
Right.
but just
Very transactional.
entering a conversation
Yeah.
just to be me was terrifying. And I think especially with other women, I almost was more nervous, because when I first started in the corporate world, women allies were harder for me to find, because we were all competing, like there wasn't,
Yeah.
it was very different 15 years ago than it is now. And once I started to do that, it was like, wow, people generally, and other people are feeling the same way as I am. Like I'm not, this isn't a, thing that's special to me. Other people are experiencing these things. Um, you know, you've talked a little bit about mental health as well, and just, creating a life that is full of meaning. And I do think there's also this big movement of, you know, women having it all, right? And you can create a life for yourself that doesn't look traditional, and you can have an income without, working traditional hours. What, in terms of you future planning, right now you have a lot of exciting new projects going on, but what have you learned through this journey that you're going to take with you next? If you end up maybe going back in full time somewhere, or things start to evolve for you a bit, what are the biggest takeaways from some of this experience that you'll prioritize, next time around?
Oh, wow.
Probably a lot.
Yeah, I I would say that there is nothing more important than prioritizing your health, and that's not just mental and emotional, but also physical health. Making sure that you are healthy. I mean, we talk about this all the time: secure your mask before securing others, but
Yeah.
it's absolutely so necessary. I mean, when I plan my week, I always plan it around my therapy, my workout classes, and I make
Yep.
sure that nothing gets in the way of that. Absolutely. Like, that's my table stakes. Like,
Yeah.
that's where I start with my schedule, and then I go from there. What I've learned is that it's hard to start out without getting the hits of ego boosts of like titles, names,
Yeah.
etc. Like talking about. But once you settle in, and I still struggle with that. Like, on LinkedIn, when you log in and you see all these people getting promotions,
Yeah.
marketing. So I see these people being attached to these huge campaigns. They're at Cannes, and
Yeah.
receiving awards. Like, that's amazing. And I'm now in a different world where I'm off on my own consulting. But if you can sit with yourself and know that those titles, money, etc., don't drive happiness,
Hmm.
um, you'll just start to feel more comfortable in your own skin self. And so when you do receive those rejections, like, you want to meet for coffee with someone and they're like, hey, can't meet, or they promise that they'll connect you with someone and they don't,
Yeah.
it's not so devastating. It's like,
Right.
I'll be fine. I'm okay.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And I'm going to move on and try something else and put myself out there. So I think in terms of my next journey or chapter in life, I don't know necessarily what that looks like. I just know that right now I know what keeps me healthy and
Yeah.
happy and fulfilled, and it will evolve. And knowing that as long as my life is relatively aligned to my values, I will, I'll be happy and fulfilled.
Yeah. Now, one thing you said that struck me, titles and money don't drive happiness. And I do think I recently learned that. And I, for so long, was just so focused on earning a certain amount of money and getting this certain level and title and feeling like recognized, right? Like the ego's need for validation,
Right.
and in all aspects of life, like you said, even in personal life, sometimes I'm like, man, I wish this person would just be like, good job or something.
Right.
But I did get to a point, I've struggled with mental health my whole life. I have anxiety, I have depression. And I think I hid that for a while. I tried to ignore it because it was shameful to talk about and embarrassing. And I did get to a point where I felt like none of this is making me better or happier. Like, it's actually sucking the life out of me.
Yeah.
And I started again, I had this community of women I was talking to who were, sharing their stories and being proud of walking away from jobs that weren't making them happy. And to me, I felt like, again, when I started out in the corporate world, like, you're, feminism and we can have what the men have. And I was so like sucked into this thought process, but I'm not a man. I'm a highly sensitive woman. I'm a mother. Like, those things don't work for me. So I guess the point of me saying all of this is, you know, people who are starting out now, maybe they're 5 years into their career, and I don't necessarily think jobs are linear anymore. I think you can really
Yeah.
carve your path in a lot of different ways. If you were if someone reached out to you, right? Maybe they're 5-year marketing professional or any type of professional, and they feel stuck and they're not happy and they don't know what that next step looks like. What would that conversation be like? How would you use your experience to sort of guide them a bit?
What do you want? You know, like spend time. I know I keep going back to this. What gives you joy? I know that sounds so annoying because everyone talks about what gives you joy.
Yeah,
Um, but what makes you happy, and really try not to focus on titles or
yeah,
specific job roles. Just be basic about, creativity makes me happy.
yeah,
Okay. So if creativity makes you happy, and I also enjoy teaching people. Okay. So teaching people makes you happy. Being creative makes you happy. All right. Let's start to figure out different paths, or even companies or cultures that value creativity, that
yeah,
value education and teaching and self-development and all of that. It doesn't have to be as drastic as a career change, moving cities,
yeah,
all of those things. It can be an adjustment and tweak.
yeah,
Um, so I think it's starting there around kind of what gives you energy and just being self-aware. But that does come with age, right? Like
yeah,
you can say that to someone when I was in my 20s, um, figuring out what brought me joy. What's interesting is that I think I had it more right when I was in my 20s, because I didn't know anything else and I
yeah,
wasn't motivated by titles. I hadn't been sucked up into the corporate world. I was a high school teacher right out of college, and I was actually working for this school that was incredibly nurturing and wonderful, and gave me a huge runway to try things out. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh, I got to try the corporate world. Well, the
yeah,
corporate world can be wonderful for people. People thrive in the corporate world. I'm not saying the corporate world isn't necessarily right, isn't necessarily wrong for everyone. But when you're talking to people that might feel stuck, it's about, okay, what does give you joy, or what makes you excited, maybe starting there. And
yeah,
maybe you won't get it won't be perfect. Nothing's perfect, right? But maybe you need to try something else and
right,
see how that works or feels. And then if it doesn't work, you can evolve. And
yeah,
maybe it's also joining a nonprofit board or volunteering your time.
yeah,
Not everyone has the wherewithal or the courage to make a complete leap. And sometimes it's not necessarily the smartest move.
right,
Sometimes, my husband, I stuck in the corporate world. I had to stay in the corporate world for much longer than I wanted to, because we were living in New York City. My husband was in training and we were paying off his medical school
yeah,
loans. And so there were financial implications to that. So what did I do? I made some choices in terms of, switching roles within the company that I felt that was
yeah.
more fulfilling. So there are tweaks and changes that you can make. And sometimes it's seeing what feels good and then going from there and evolving.
Yeah. I like that you said that, the tweaks, because I do think like sometimes people feel like it has to be this giant drastic,
No.
gesture or change. And to your point, financially, sometimes people don't have that privilege to be able to do that. I always say I'm so incredibly fortunate. I have a very supportive partner. We were in a situation where I could take 4 months off because I needed a break. I had no idea where I was going next, but that was a privilege. Not a lot of people have
Right.
that. So I do think, looking at small tweaks you can make. And I have a lot of people, again, I work in talent acquisition, that say I'm in this role now, but this is what I want to be doing. And a lot of times it's just, well, research that. What do you need to do that? What
Yeah.
can you accomplish? Set realistic goals for yourself. And then at least you have something you're working towards, right? And that can even just help shift the mindset of feeling stuck. Like you're working towards something. And I love too getting involved with nonprofits. I mean, having passion projects, I think, are so important in life. Before
Yeah.
corporate Sarah, I was a dancer. I went to school for performing arts. I was in the arts, and now I'm like, that was such a hard transition for me because I was sitting at a desk every day and not feeling creative at all. So I really had to find ways to like feed that need, and create space for that. And I do think it's so important, and it's not a weakness to need fulfillment outside of that. I have one
Absolutely.
last question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely. I think honestly, what keeps you sane sometimes is having those side hustle projects
Yeah.
too. I know it can be exhausting. So people who are working in industries where it is, definitely not 9 to 5. It is more sometimes 6:30 to 8 o'clock at
Yeah.
night. It's, especially with commutes. And but if you can have these side hustles, or at least have friend groups that where you're asking questions about what's going on in their lives,
Yep.
learning, about their experiences in the industry, seeing if that feels like a good fit. I mean, there's different ways to learn about things, even if it's through osmosis.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a huge plunge into a different industry because it might not be right. Also,
Right.
you don't get the job until you get the job. So sometimes you have to try something out to see if it fits. And sometimes it's smarter just to make small adjustments. And that may be just simply taking on a volunteer project.
Yeah, exactly. This is a question that I'm just has come to me as we're having this discussion. Um, you know, we are women who were both mothers, we've both had, careers. Do you think that there is, if you think about the traditional feminism sense, right? Like, having the same rights and the same pay and the same, right? But now there's some people who feel like, well, now you're asking for so much because you want the same, but you also don't want to put in the same hours, or you don't want to have the same in office, expectations. Do you think that this is feminism evolving, or a new movement that is sort of happening? And again, this just came to my mind, so I'm putting you on the spot here, but I do think it can be controversial sometimes for people.
I think I think we're so focused on time spent doing something. And,
Yeah.
now that I've gone off on my own and doing consulting, oftentimes you talk about your hourly rate. Well, I've been in the industry for 16 plus years. I can do what takes someone who's been in the industry a lot less,
Yeah.
not as long, an hour, I can accomplish probably so much more within that hour.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I do think we need to stop looking at time spent on the job. The women, and this is based on, my own experience, women I've worked with are so much more efficient about getting shit done. We do it
Yeah.
quickly and we do it well.
Yeah.
And because we aim to appease
Yeah.
too, like that's kind of some of our issue. But I do think as a system, we need to stop talking about this concept of hours spent
Yes. Yes.
and look at what people can bring to the table and look at the years they have spent honing their craft. I know that doesn't answer your question, but I do think when women are taking on the brunt of household work, and look, we're doing our work with our partners to make sure, and we're talking about heterosexual couples, right?
Yeah.
Who male and female. So I'm also looking at this with a very limited perspective.
Yeah.
But talking to my husband about division of work, how I want to spend my time with, my friends outside of the house,
Yeah.
how I want to, be a mom and spend time with my daughter, etc. But so we kind of look at everything with this like sense of time.
Yeah.
And I think we, especially in the working world, our system needs to start looking at maybe it doesn't matter if the woman is working from 7 to 7 and she's truncated her day, because this woman's really motivated
Yeah.
to still have the same sense of responsibility at work, the same title, etc. She'll work I don't know, she'll work really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not
No.
that answers your question, but I do think we need to, with this idea of feminism and equal pay and given the chance to have these titles and roles, we need to start to look at the required amount of time that a woman needs to be spending at her job,
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, you definitely did, because I think it's shifted for some companies, but yes, it's this like clock in, clock out, what do you
Right.
do during those hours? And I think I've had some bosses that was, you could be playing solitaire on your computer, but you had to sit at that desk till
Right.
6:30. Like,
Right.
why? And then I've had some who said, if you're 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, your brain, like, you're done, then stop working. And I'm always, especially, I'm lucky enough to work remote. I usually am done earlier in the day to like get the kids home and make dinner, but then I'm always happy to hop back on later because I feel
Right.
refreshed. I can focus now. Like, I haven't been sitting here for hours. So you did. I think there's a lot of systematic changes that have to happen to allow
Yeah.
a lot of this to flourish. But yeah, no, you definitely answered my question. I think there's so much more we could talk about in terms of
Yeah.
mental health and the system and things, but we are almost at time, so maybe we'll have to do a part two, because I've just loved this discussion. But one question we always ask our guests, and whether or not you're a tea drinker, is how do you take your tea, and if not, what is your beverage of choice?
I always start out with a cup of coffee in the morning and whole milk. No.
Okay. That's actually just how my sister-in-law drinks it, and my mother. I'm like the oddball. I always have to bring the almond milk when we travel on
Okay.
vacation. Love that. Well, tonight it was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm sure we'll be doing more of these because we have so much more we could talk about. But I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I love the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.